First of all, a very warm welcome to the Goldman Sachs 10 Billion Women lunch. Some of you will remember we had a very successful 10,000 women lunch a few years ago, but we have hugely scaled up since then. There are now, in fact, more women receiving mentorship from Goldman than there are actually women on Earth. I'm just kidding. This is actually the opposite of a Goldman Sachs lunch, not least because there will be no lunch. It is delicious to be back here in Aspen. The last time we were here, exactly a year ago, on the final day of this forum, my wife, Priya, sent me out of the hotel room in the morning with a shopping list of 4 items. 2 of those items were burritos, and 2 of those items were pregnancy tests. I returned and asked which she wanted first. She said the burrito, which told me what the test soon confirmed, that we were having a baby. Today, exactly a year later, I can confirm with our little 4-month-old Orion, who some of you may have seen somewhere on the premises, that I have a little bit of an action pledge that I'll fulfill, or the closest I've ever come to one. So I was asked to speak to you today about forgiveness, based on a book I wrote, the book Pauline mentioned. And as I considered what I wanted to say to this community that Priya and I so cherish, the topic grew and meandered, but in one sense it has stayed true. After I have spoken, I will need your forgiveness. Because my subject today is not easy. I want to reflect with you on where we stand as a community on some of the injustices of our time. I want to suggest that we may not always be the leaders we think we are. 4 years and 8 days ago, I read in the newspaper an astonishing story. A man in Texas, a white supremacist named Mark Stroman, had been executed the night before. So far, so Texas. But in the white supremacist's final days, one of his victims, a Muslim immigrant named Raisuddin Bhuyan, had been fighting to save the life of the man who shot him in the face in the feverish aftermath of 9/11. I was intrigued, and before long, totally hooked. I went on a journey of reporting and writing a book about it, The True American, that at its heart was about how my country was slowly dividing into 2 parallel societies, a republic of dreams and a republic of fears. After Raisuddin was shot, his life was in tatters, but he remained in America, fought hard, and became whole again. And once he had managed to secure the American dream for which he'd come, he reached the conclusion that he had accessed that dream in a way that was actually impossible for many native-born Americans around him. And he came to see that the man who shot him was actually on the other side of that line of fortune. Born to a mother who told him as a little boy that she wished she'd had the $50 to abort him, having cycled through the dismal schools and prisons that we've been talking about this week that ruin so many young American men. And so Raisuddin, in the name of his faith and of his newfound American citizenship, forgave his erstwhile attacker, and then, remarkably, took the state of Texas to court, took Governor Rick Perry to court to try to prevent them from putting Stroman to death. Reporting this story was, for me, a radicalizing experience, an awakening. It brought to vivid, pungent life what we all read every day, what we have been talking about here every day, as a defining story of our time, that America and so many other societies around the world today has a grave inequality problem. That so many places in this disruptive, revolutionary moment in world affairs are partitioned lands of thriving right here and wilting right there. The world, especially the developing world, has hugely reduced poverty in recent decades, and we, of course, have many fellows on the front lines of that battle. Yet we plainly live in a new Gilded Age, in which extraordinary changes in our economies and technologies have created, as revolutionary times always do, extreme winners and extreme losers. Some of us, probably many of us in this room, have the feeling of living in one of the most extraordinary times in human history. Many others around the world have yet to see these times benefit them in any tangible way. And still others are actually watching their lives get worse day by day, sometimes perhaps so that ours can get better. We are a community branded as leaders, living through this revolutionary moment, living through this extreme winning and extreme losing. It falls on us to ask the tough questions about it. But we here in Aspen are in a bit of a tight spot. Our deliberations about what to do about this extreme winning and extreme losing are sponsored by the extreme winners. This community was founded by stalwarts of American capitalism. Today we sit in spaces named after Pepsi, the beverage, and Coke, the brothers. Our discussion of Martin Luther King and Omelas is sponsored by folks like Accenture and David Rubenstein and someone I've never met named Palm. We are deeply enmeshed and invested, all of us, in the establishment and systems we are also supposed to question. And yet we are a community of leaders that seeks justice, claims that we are in the service of something beyond ourselves. These identities are tricky to reconcile. Today I want to challenge how we reconcile them. There's no consensus on anything here, as anyone who's been in any seminar knows. But I believe that many of our discussions here operate within what I would call the Aspen Consensus, which, like the Washington Consensus or the Beijing Consensus, describes a nest of shared assumptions within which our diverse ideas hatch. The Aspen Consensus demarcates what we mostly agree not to question, even as we question so much. And though I call it the Aspen Consensus, it is in many ways the dominant ethic worldwide among the winners of our age, across business, government, and even the nonprofit sector. The Aspen Consensus, to me, in a nutshell, is this: the winners of our age must be challenged to do more good, but never, ever tell them to do less harm. The Aspen Consensus holds that capitalism's rough edges must be sanded and its surplus fruit shared, but the underlying system must never be questioned. The Aspen Consensus says, give back, which is, of course, a compassionate and noble thing. But amid the $20 million second homes and $4,000 parkas of Aspen, it is a little gauche to observe that giving back is also a Band-Aid that winners stick on the system that has served them in the conscious or subconscious hope that it will forestall major surgery to that system, surgery that might threaten their privileges. The Aspen Consensus, I believe, tries to market the idea of generosity as a substitute for the idea of justice. It says, make money in the usual ways, and then give some back, whether it's through a foundation or factoring in social impact to your business plan, or adding a second or third bottom line to your analysis, or giving a left sock to the poor for every right sock you sell. The Aspen Consensus says do more good, not do less harm. I want to sow the seed of a difficult conversation today, a conversation that in many ways has been brewing this week in our small groups about this Aspen Consensus. Because I love this community, and I fear for all of us, myself first and foremost, that we may not be as virtuous as we think we are, that history may not be as kind to us as we hope it will, that in the final analysis, our role in the inequities of our age may not be remembered well. Now, I understand that this may sound strange, because the winners of our disruptive age are arguably as concerned about the plight of the losers as any elite in the history of the world. I think that's true. But the question I'm raising is about what exactly the winners propose to do in response. And I believe the winner's response, certainly not always, but still too often, is to soften the blows of the system, but to preserve the system at any cost. This response is problematic. It allows far too many of us to stay safe, to evade hard questions about our role in contributing to the disease we also seek to treat. So let us step outside the safe, pleasant Aspen Consensus for just a moment. Let us talk honestly about some of the harm the winners of our age commit while doing well for themselves, before compensating for it, by also doing good. First, the winners have benefited in the last few decades from a massive reconcentration of wealth by the upper echelons of society globally. The rich didn't suddenly get better at algebra. The world economy changed, yes, and as it did, the rich fought for policies that helped them stack up, protect, and bequeath the money, resisting taxes on inheritances and financial transactions, fighting for carried interest to be taxed differently from income, insisting on a sacred right to conceal money in trusts and shell companies and really weird islands. This hoarding does not merely correlate with the have-nots' struggles. It is, in a certain sense, a cause, because that is the money that would be going to schools, to vocational training, to infrastructure, to social insurance, to financial aid. We know this because there are societies where a lot more of this money is taken from the most fortunate, and it results pretty straightforwardly in less cruelty for the least fortunate. Second, the winners of our age are huge beneficiaries of the generation-long effort by the corporate world to offload risk and volatility from the balance sheet, often transferring them onto workers. The growing rationalization of the business world in recent decades, abetted by the development of management as a science, led to greater focus, increased efficiencies, rising valuations, and bitter realities for many, many workers. The car service Uber, who some of you may have heard of, gets a lot of bad press for denying responsibility for its workers' lives, health, desire for career growth. Yet more and more of the world's workforce resembles Uber drivers. Uber is in no way special. People who shoulder risk for the companies they work for, while no one shoulders their risk. The contract worker is the future in this supposedly disruptive new age, and she is forced to work volatile hours that change week to week, announce at the last minute. There are now extreme daycares, this is the actual name of them, where you can drop your kid off at 3 a.m. because your shift starts at 5 and you only found out yesterday, and no kids sleep and those kids have no shot, but we now have extreme daycare in America. And you juggle an income that bounces around willy-nilly, knowing that if anything happens to her, the employer owes her nothing. For her, too, this is a very different kind of age of disruption. Third, The winners of our age have benefited hugely from their institutions' growing remoteness from any community. The increasing globalization and virtualization of business has insulated the privileged from the effect they have on real people's lives with devastating consequences. In the old days, if a company CEO suddenly dumped the defined benefits pension plan, you knew who to go see to complain. Today, it may be an unseen private equity firm in some other country who lobbied for the change, and their 60-year-old workers' future evaporates. In the Mortgage Meltdown of a few years ago, some of you may remember it, there were so many layers of abstraction between the traders and the actual things they were trading that very few people smelled a rat. Businesses' tax-averse profits ricochet through Bermuda and then do this thing called the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. Some of you may have eaten that. Some of the leading companies of our age pay negligible taxes, belonging as they do a little bit everywhere and nowhere in particular. The ultimate virtualization has occurred in finance, where banks, which once saw themselves as boring servants of real economy firms, decided that finance was an exciting end in itself and chose idle speculation rather than aiding the creation of tangible economic value as their raison d'etre. Now, a significant minority of us here are not in business. Yet even in other sectors, my own very much included, we're living in an age in which the assumptions and values of business are perhaps more influential than they ought to be. Our culture has turned businessmen and women into philosophers, revolutionaries, social activists, saviors of the poor. We are at risk of forgetting other languages of human progress, of morality, of democracy, of solidarity, of decency, of justice. Sometimes we even succumb to the seductive Davos dogma that business and the business approach is the only thing that can change the world today, in the face of so much historical evidence to the contrary. And so, when the winners of our age, concerned as they are with inequality, answer that problem, all too often they answer it within the logic and frameworks of business and markets. We talk a lot about giving back, profit sharing, win-wins, social impact investing, triple bottom lines, which, by the way, are something my 4-month-old son has. And sometimes I wonder whether these various forms of giving back have become to our era what the papal indulgence was in the Middle Ages, a relatively inexpensive way of getting oneself seemingly on the right side of justice without having to alter the fundamentals of a long life. Because when you give back, when you have a side foundation, a side CSR project, a side social impact fund, you gain an exemption from more rigorous scrutiny. You helped 100 poor kids in the ghetto learn how to code, important work. But the indulgence that results spares you from questions about the larger systems and structures you sustain that benefit you and punish others. Weak banking regulations and labor laws. Zoning rules that happen to keep the poor people somehow very far from your neighborhood. Porous safety nets. The enduring and unrepaired legacies of slavery and racial supremacy and caste systems. These systems and structures have real victims, as we have talked about this week. And we here are sometimes at risk, I think, of confusing generosity toward those victims with justice for those victims. Generosity is a win-win, but justice often is not. The winners of our age don't enjoy the idea that some of them might actually have to lose a little bit, to sacrifice for justice to be done. In Aspen, you don't hear a lot of ideas involving the privileged and the powerful being in the wrong and needing to surrender some of their status and position for the sake of justice. We talk a lot here about giving more. We don't talk about taking less. We talk a lot here about what we should be doing more of. We don't talk about what we should be doing less of. I think sometimes that our Aspen Consensus has an underdeveloped sense of human darkness. There is risk in too much positivity. Sometimes to do right by people, you must begin by naming who is in the wrong. So let's just come out and say the thing you're not supposed to say in this valley. That many of the winners of our age are also in some way contributors to the problems they bravely seek to solve. And for the greater good to prevail on any number of issues, some people may have to lose a little bit to actually do less harm and not merely more good. We know that enlightened capital didn't get rid of the slave trade. Impact investing didn't abolish child labor and put fire escapes on the tenement factories. Drug makers didn't stop slipping a little antifreeze into the medicine as part of a CSR initiative. In each of these cases, the interests of the many had to defeat the interests of a recalcitrant few. I know, don't worry, I know, that this speech won't make me popular at the bar tonight. Or perhaps any night from now on. But this, for me, is an act of stepping into the arena, to quote one of the many things that our wonderful teacher moderators challenged us to do. I know some of you agree with me about some of these things already because we have bonded for years, actually, over a shared feeling that something in this community that we find extraordinary also didn't feel quite right. There are many others who, instead of merely criticizing, as I do, are living rejections of the Aspen Consensus, quitting lucrative lives, risking body and more to fight the system. You all me, you who fight for gay rights in India, who live ardently among the rural poor in South Africa, who risk assassination or worse to report news of corruption. I'm not speaking to you tonight, and I know there are many of you. I'm speaking to those who, like me, may feel caught between the ideals championed by this institute and the self-protective instinct that is always the reflex of people with a lot to lose. I am as guilty as anyone. I am part of the wave of gentrification, and let's just call it displacement, in Brooklyn, one of the most rapidly gentrifying places in America. Any success I've had can be traced entirely to my terrific choice in parents and their ability to afford incredibly expensive private schools. I like good wine. I use Uber a lot. I once stole playing cards from a private jet. I want my new son to have everything I can give him, even though I know that this is the beginning of the inequality I loathe. I often wonder if what I do, writing, is capable of making any difference. When I entered this fellowship, I was so taken with that summons to make a difference. But to be honest, I've also always had a complicated relationship to this place. I have heard too many of my peers talking of how only after the IPO or the next few million will we feel our kids have security. These inflated notions of what it takes to make a living and support a family are the beginning of so much neglect toward our larger human family. I walk into too many rooms named for people or organizations that don't necessarily mean well for the world. And then in those rooms, we talk and talk about making the world better. I struggled in particular with the project. I couldn't figure out what bothered me about it for the longest time. I wasn't very good, as Peter can tell you, at coming up with one or getting one done. And I realized through conversation with fellows in similar dilemmas what the problem was for me. Many people, including some being featured later tonight, are engaged in truly extraordinary and commendable projects. We are at our best when our projects take the system head on. But I wrestled with what I perceived to be the idea behind the project, of creating a generous side endeavor, rather than fighting to reform, bite by bite, the hands that feed us. I felt the project distracted me from the real question: is your regular life, not your side project, on the right side of justice? Ask yourself, does the world need more food companies donating playgrounds to fat kids, or rather, reformed food companies that don't profit from fattening kids? Does the world need more Chinese tycoons engaging in philanthropy in China, or rather, more honest and less corrupt Chinese tycoons? Does the world need Goldman Sachs partners mentoring women or giving money to a charter school, or rather, Goldman partners gambling everything to say, the way business is done at my firm is not what I wish it was, and I will fight to make Goldman a steward rather than the vampire squid it was called of resources, even if that costs me my job? I am reminded here of the final words of our Omelas reading. They seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. Sometimes I find myself wondering what I'm doing and what we're doing here in Aspen. Are we here to change the system or slowly be changed by it? Are we using our collective strength, and the strength in this room is immense, to challenge power? Or are we helping to make an unjust, unpalatable system feel a little more digestible? And yet I still come year after year. Why? Because there is something amazing about this community, something I've never found in any community I've been a part of. And because I have the feeling that we could be even more than we have been, genuine stewards of this chaotic, revolutionary moment in world affairs. But if we are to play that role, I think we need to consider a shift in orientation in this community, from working within the system to honestly and bravely questioning where that system fails people, even if to our benefit. From the unthreatening idea of doing good by doing well, to the braver notion of doing good at the risk of our opportunity to do well. This community has meant so much to me and to Priya. It always will. I'm filled with hope as I leave you here today that we will find a way to become what has rarely existed in history, an establishment organization that questions the establishment, a society of traitors to our class, of people who choose to spend the capital of their privilege on questioning and repairing the system that minted the privilege. We can always just go on playing and winning at the same old game and giving some back. But I have a feeling this community, summoning the genuine spirit of leadership, could muster the gall to reimagine the game itself. Forgive me, and thank you.